Hello lovely people, welcome to another book chat. I have 3 books I want to talk about this week, 2 fiction and 1 non-fiction, and I'm just going to dive into it.
Sophie Vlogs.
Starting with Anna of Kleve, Queen of Secrets by Alison Weir. This is the 4th book in Six Tudor Queens series. As you might expect, each book focuses on a different Tudor queen. This is the only one of Alison Weir's series of this that I've read, but I'm A, familiar with history, and B, I got this because I went to see a talk that she did about the writing of this book, which was very interesting. I actually am really glad I went to that talk because I think that makes me slightly more generous to this book than I might have been if I didn't go to the talk. I did enjoy this book. The thing is of all of the wives of Henry VIII, Anna of Cleves is the one that we have the least amount of actual source and information on. So in some ways that gives you a little bit of freedom because you can inject into that some extra stuff because you kind of have to guess some things. In other ways that felt ever so slightly lacking because I think essentially I have 2 critiques of this book, and one of them is that it was just a little bit overlong. One thing I like about Alison Weir's writing in this is you can tell she's a historian. I've previously read some of her non-fiction, but this is the first fiction of hers that I've read. And you can really see that historical knowledge in descriptions of clothing, descriptions of the settings, how like Tudor households work, how when she describes all of the palaces in this, like you really, if you want to get a sense of Tudor reality, that sort of thing, I think this is really good for that. You get really immersed in the world and how it all is. I think that first critique is that it's like a 500-page book. And bless her heart, I actually really love Anna of Cleves. I think she's great. She is not the most overtly, I don't want to say she's not interesting. It's that compared to some of the other Tudor wives who had a lot of excitement and scandal and blah 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 attached to their names, Anna of Kleve is just sort of like a nice woman who got married to this guy and like tried to make the best of it, sort of came out okay, lived her life. Like, she doesn't have the most controversial life. As a result, Alison Weir has sort of like introduced a plot that is entirely fictional, and I don't always mind my historical fiction books featuring things that are not completely accurate. Like, I have read like Philippa Gregory books where she does that. I have read historical fiction where that happens. That's not something that automatically bothers me because I feel like when you read historical fiction, you're going in for a good story. If you wanted it to be completely accurate, you'd read non-fiction. So that doesn't inherently bother me. This is not a spoiler because it takes place literally 16 pages into the book. But the conceit of this novel, which is why it generated a little bit of controversy when it was first released, is that the reason that Henry, or one of the reasons that Henry didn't consummate the marriage with Anna, is that he could tell that she had previously carried a child to term. And it was very interesting in Alison Weir's talk when she was talking about actually like all of the different, she's not just come up with this out of nowhere. There are all of these things that were said during the trial and like evidence and blah blah blah. That was very interesting. Whether or not that in itself is true, I didn't really care for the way in which it was portrayed in this. Namely, and again, 16 pages in, not a spoiler, but like Anna is very young and naive and is taken advantage of by this guy, ends up having sex with him because she doesn't quite realise what that is, and has a baby, and then the story continues, and then this guy gets like weaved in, because obviously we're not just going to have it as like a one thing, he's going to recur, and I didn't really care for the way in which that was framed, because you're introduced to this as a situation where a guy is very much taking advantage of a very innocent and naive girl, and then somehow later I'm supposed to root for this being a romantic relationship, which is something that I get that we're in Tudor England, like I'm not like being like, oh, they should have relationships like modern people have relationships. I'm not disregarding the way that the world worked. I'm just saying that I am a contemporary modern reader, therefore it is hard for me to root for a romantic love affair whereby the guy definitely took advantage of a child, you know? So, like, I didn't care for that relationship being weaved in. It didn't super bother me until quite near the end, because there's like a kind of emotional climax which is to do with that, which I didn't feel any connection with because I don't care about this relationship. When it comes to the actual, like, story of Anna's life, that was interesting. Like, she did have quite a good friendship with Henry. Like, they remained friends after the divorce and, like, annulment technically, and that sort of thing. So that was actually all very interesting. It's just that Anna is she's like sweet and naive and blah blah blah, but then also sometimes like very very forceful and that sort of thing. So, like, I had a perfectly fun time reading this. I think this is a fun piece of historical fiction. I have heard that the general consensus seems to be that this is not the best of the 6 Tudor Queen series. Based on this, I would still read some of those other books, and I would read them out of order because, like, I know the history, so that's not going to be a problem. Still interesting. I think there's a reason why Anna of Kleve is not so commonly written about, because of A, lack of evidence, and B, just like she's not quite so interesting as some of the other ones in many ways. But it was still interesting, especially post Henry's death, to see the way in which her life went after that, because that was not something that I had the greatest amount of knowledge about before going to see Alison Weir talk. So yes, on the whole, perfectly fun historical fiction, good read. Would maybe say that maybe some of the other books in the series might be better if you are wanting to read some Tudor historical fiction. But you know. To change tack onto some fantasy, I also read The Gold Falcon by Katharine Kerr. If you watch all of my book chats, you'll have known that I've been reading my way through this series again recently. I will give the same introduction that I always give, whereby this is a fantasy series based on Celtic mythology. The series is kind of like a Celtic knot, wherein souls are reborn in different bodies each time. We follow a number of different plot lines. The books tend to flip between like 2 or 3 different time periods with these same souls, and you see how past actions influence present actions, and then it all links up again at the end like a little Celtic knotwork. But I haven't got to the end yet. This is the 4, 6. This is the 8. No, hang on. 4, 8, 9, 10. 12th book in that series, so I will give no spoilers. This book closes off the 3rd set of 4 books, but it also serves as the first book in the final set of books, so there are 4 books after this. It is very interesting. This is our previous book closed a lot of threads that have been going since the very first book. This book continues some, but is beginning some new threads. So I can see that we have a final culmination that is brewing, which is this big conflict between these 2 people. What was interesting about this is that characters who were quite powerful in previous books and passed away and sort of finished that journey, this is the first time that those ones have been reborn and brought back into this weaving. We've had their past selves be present in some of the past narratives, but this is the first time they've been brought back into sort of our most contemporary narrative that we're following. So that was actually very interesting, just to get a little bit more of an understanding of how that works. I have to say I didn't rate this as highly as the previous book, but I thought the previous book was my favourite of the series because it really wrapped up a lot of things and had a lot of like emotional repercussions and stuff like this. You can tell that this one is setting you up. So it is not always the most dazzling of ones because there's a lot of just like, we have to get people in place, we have to get like situations in place, and especially because we have these 2 characters who've been reborn, they sort of have to catch up on, because of the nature of the powers that they have a vague sense of what they used to be like, which is a bit rare. But there's a lot of them like re-catching up so they can get to the point that they need to be at, and events can get to the point that we need to be at to then go forward and do this final crescendo of the final 4 books, which will be wrapping up this plot thing. So I'm loving this series. I am really blitzing through it, so I don't want to sound like this is a bad book. I'm just saying this really has that sense of like, we're setting stuff up, which is necessary, but not like the most like, oh my god, I love this book. But still a fun read. The book I'm going to end on is non-fiction. This is Stop the World, the autobiography of Winnie Ewing, edited by Michael Russell. Winnie Ewing was the first female SMP, oh my god, what are they called? MP, sorry. momentarily lost my ability to function. Let's do that again. Winnie Ewing was the first female SNP MP in Westminster. This is her autobiography. It follows her time both as an MP and an MEP. It was really interesting. My main point of comparison, I feel, with this book is Caroline Lucas's book, because again, they were both female MPs, but also like the only member of their party in Westminster, which is really interesting because on the one hand, you're at a disadvantage because you don't have like a big party backing you. You're very much like you're on your own, that sort of thing. But in some ways is a benefit because you don't have a party whip, so you can very much like follow what you think is right and that sort of thing. And you can work cross-party and stuff like that sometimes. So it was really interesting. Winnie was MP during like the 60s and stuff, so she did face like a lot of sexism. She had like a stalker at one point, which is very creepy. And also, I had never quite realised the amount of antagonism between Labour and the SNP, so that was also interesting to learn about. It was also very interesting to compare her experience as an MP to an MEP. It seems like she had a much better time being an MEP. And again, I have a vague understanding of how like Westminster functions. I don't want to oversell myself, but like, I have some knowledge there. Whereas it was interesting to learn a bit more about how the European Parliament functions and like the different, like you can be part of groups that are like multiple MPs across different countries and blah blah blah. And again, because there were not a huge amount of SNP MEPs, again you have that like it's not like all of the Labour people stick together and all of the Tories stick together and blah. It's like a little bit more like, okay, let's go cross and make some bonds and stuff like that. So that was really interesting. And again, it is really interesting reading about a female MP in a time when that was not such a common thing to do. So yeah, this was just a thoroughly enjoyable, very educational read for me. I've read a number of political books across varying different political spectrums by now, and I feel like each time it sort of like expands my understanding just that little bit more and that sort of thing. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. It was very good. That's everything I wanted to talk about this week. As per usual, have you read any of these? Do you have thoughts on any of them? I would love to hear anything you'd like to say in the comments down below, but otherwise I will see you next time for something different.